Good morning. This is Katie Robinson Edwards, your curator from the Umlauf Sculpture Garden and Museum, bringing you Facebook Live, a very, very special Facebook Live this morning. And I'm going to flip the camera around and introduce you to Dr. Rowena Houghton Dasch. Dr. Rowena Houghton Dasch is the Executive Director of the Neill-Cochran House Museum, and she's going to take us to an incredibly special place today. And first I want to say we are not wearing our masks because we are tethered together but at least 12 feet apart, and we also have microphones, so we hope you can hear us this week. Hello Rowena, how are you?
Good morning, great.
Good morning. Would you please tell us a little bit about where we are and then take us to the special place?
Sure. You're standing in front of the original home of what is now today the Neill-Cochran House Museum. We are the 10th oldest historic site still standing in the city of Austin and home to two of the original structures built on site in 1856. Originally, this property was 17.5 acres. It was intended to be sort of a suburban farm. So everything you see that direction and then on up towards 24th Street was originally property for this home. Today we're only on 3/4 of an acre and we are embedded in the middle of West Campus. As we walk around, you'll see that the house is a Greek Revival style home with 6 massive 26-foot tall wooden tapering columns. And the structure is built of limestone rubble. The reason for that is that, much as it may not appear to have been, this house was built on a budget. The Hill family, who built it in 1856 under the direction of Abner Cook, who was also the builder of the Governor's Mansion and Woodlawn, which is also known as the Pease Mansion, as well as a number of other prominent residences in Austin. Built this of limestone rubble because it was less expensive than brick. So it's unusual to see a home of this style and this quality built of a low-cost product like limestone rubble.
And part of the a couple things. If some of you think it looks like a frat house, it does. When you're coming through, it may resemble a frat house.
That's
is
what
not.
Our t-shirt says. Neill-Cochran House Museum, not a frat house.
And what we want you to notice too is the spectacular quality of this house. Good morning. And how huge it is and grand. And we're going to contrast that with this little house, which is really the purpose of our Facebook Live today. Rowena, tell us about this tiny house.
Sure. So this structure is the only slave quarter structure still standing in the city of Austin. It is also made of limestone rubble, probably predated the house that you were just looking at, and in all likelihood was built here first for the use of the people who then built the main home. 1856 is the latter end of the antebellum period, 5 years before the Civil War began, and Austin was very much a slave-holding town. In 1860, there were about 6,000 people living in Austin. 2,000 of those people were enslaved. So much of the construction work that happened that originally built our city was made possible by enslaved labor. We know that the Hills, as they ran out of money and were struggling to complete their project, sold 5 enslaved people. So this project literally was built on the backs of enslaved people who were treated as commodities at that time.
And I understand you're doing a in-depth research project to try to figure out who they are.
We don't know their names. We may have determined one of their names, a man named Thomas Hill, who was from Alabama, as was Washington Hill, who was enslaved and ultimately became a very well-known and well-regarded mason, master mason in Austin. He's buried in Oakwood Cemetery and has actually a really elaborate headstone, and so he may well have been one of these enslaved people, whether sold to finance the construction or part of the team who built the house. We're not clear. But unfortunately, even when sales took place, you didn't necessarily see names on the deeds.
May we go inside? And
so, as you see, the house is this house is built of the same materials as the main house. However, what you probably can't see unless you're really looking at both at the same time is that the quality of the materials was lower. It appears you can see that in many cases these are much smaller pieces of stone than what were used on the house, and then the anchoring edges. If you look back on the larger house, you see how large those stones are for structural support. You don't get that here. This building was a bit more haphazardly constructed, probably constructed with very little time. Not as much time was given to make it possible, and as I say, it was the lower quality stone that was used for this. What you're seeing there is one window. When we get inside, of course you haven't been into the larger home today, but it is full of fabulous large windows, and you'll see a real distinction inside the slave quarters in terms of the amount of light.
Great, let's go inside. And we'll start downstairs. It is 2 stories.
It is. Currently there is a stairwell outside going up to the 2nd story here. When the property became a museum in the early 1960s, the stairwell actually went that direction, and that was the window you were just looking at was a door. What we're not sure about at this point is whether there was originally an external staircase. We lean towards thinking there was not, because there's evidence that there was an internal stepladder with a trap door to get you to the 2nd story. So you can see that we're going into a relatively humble structure. Again, you haven't been inside the home, but the larger home has really beautiful true plaster walls, so very nice smooth surface. That doesn't exist here. Originally these walls would have been unpainted, just you're looking at essentially the stone from the exterior is exposed on the interior as well. This kind of like Portland cement was put in presumably to preserve the structure back in the 1960s. Unfortunately, the way that stuff works is it welds itself essentially to whatever is attached to. So we're not sure actually at the moment whether we're ever going to be able to remove the white from the walls, which we would love to do.
So it would have been a natural
it
colored
would have been
stone.
that buff limestone color on the inside. There's actually wood embedded into the walls as well. You can see some old nails sticking out the sides. Presumably that was done for just a convenience sake, in order to be able to string things across the room, in order to have hooks to put implements on, clothing, whatever might be useful, because otherwise you're drilling straight into the stone wall.
And I'm sorry, Rowena, since I'm focusing on this spectacular Ginger Geyer piece,
Sure.
Tell us about the current exhibition that you have going on. So this is not, obviously...
That is not normally here.
Yeah.
We, in January, opened a show called If These Walls Could Talk, which is a collaborative project between the museum, Ginger Geyer, and Jennifer Russo-Cumberbatch, who is an actor and storyteller. Ginger, this is a retrospective of Ginger's career. She's been working in porcelain for the past 30 years, and she has an alter ego named Clora, who's an adolescent girl, and her work explores Clora's world. This project brought a new voice in named Ruby Virginia. So you have Clora here and Ruby Virginia there. And the 2 girls explore our historic site and talk about the difficult issues that sometimes we as adults have a much harder time dealing with ourselves. So the scarecrow you were looking at is not new. It was not produced for this show. And in its original iteration, it was sort of a silly scarecrow. But Ginger has repurposed it and retold the story to focus on the Jim Crow South.
And how apt that all this is in here, obviously deliberately chosen.
Yes, right. Well, and the way the show developed, it was really originally a retrospective of her career, and the issues of race and presence and absence that the show now focuses on came to be when Ginger understood the significance of this building. So this building really became the fulcrum point for that show. And you're seeing various different installations that are connected to work or household help, that this space has been turned into kind of a rumination on those topics.
And let's go upstairs.
Yes.
And on our way out, we will mention that none of these objects are actually original. A lot of them are of the era, but that you don't have any objects that were originally in these slave quarters.
No, we don't.
But we do have the building.
We do have the building. We're lucky to have the building. Buildings like this were typically built to a lower standard, as this was, from the homes of which they were a part. But because this was built of limestone rubble, it has protected the building itself. But of course, after the Civil War, circumstances changed in so many different ways. People did continue to live out here for a good long while, but at the same time, by the 20th century, this space, from what we understand, became used a bit more like a storage shed and was not kept up. So, as I say, we're lucky that we have it at all.
So this bed was donated to the Neill-Cochran House Museum some time ago.
Yes.
And so none of the furniture is original, but the floor is the floor that would have been part of the slave quarters,
yes.
we think.
This is the original floor. As you can see, you see these lines running across the floor. They are the evidence of circular saw marks. This is 1855 lumber. But again, just as with the stone, this is lower grade lumber than what you see in the larger home. You don't see circular saw marks on the original wood floors inside that home.
That is fascinating.
Note how dark it is in here. We do have 2 windows upstairs plus this door. Could have originally been 3 windows with no door. This is where the trap door was originally, and so as I say, we think that probably it was only interior access originally for this structure. But yes, nothing in here is original. We are in the process of doing a major project to research ultimately in order to reinterpret and reinstall this slave quarters space so that it can be a more authentic representation of how the enslaved people would have lived in this structure and worked, what they might have been doing here. We're going to have to do that with no original artifacts because nothing has survived that we know of. But we're looking forward to having the opportunity to shed some light on this period of time from Austin's history.
And what a fascinating part of our history it is that many people don't even know this is here in West Campus.
Right in the heart of West Campus.
And tell us who your partners are in doing some research, because I know there's been a lot done.
Sure. We are working primarily with Dr. Tara Dudley in the UT School of Architecture. She's a historic preservationist, and she and her students conducted site work here last fall and then continued that work this spring in order to shed some light on the histories of our site as well as larger Austin. Dr. Dinah Berry and her students have also, she's just was named head of the UT History Department, and she and her students in a seminar last fall also did work on the antebellum era in Austin, more writ large. And through that work, we've actually come across the names of several of the enslaved men, women, and even children who were here during the time the State School for the Blind was here. The Hills ran out of money and never moved in, so we were a rental for our first 20 years. And the first occupants were the State School for the Blind. And because it was a state project, there are actually good documentary papers about how it was operating and what they were spending money on, thankfully. And so in that instance, we finally have begun to find some names.
And we should close up here, but I want to thank everyone for joining us. And I also wanted to point out that you guys have been, the Neill-Cochran House Museum, particularly under the leadership of Rowena, have been working on this for a long time.
A long time. I mean, you don't just jump into this conversation.
Yeah.
And so we, as you said, we opened this show back in January. If These Walls Could Talk, Reckoning with the Past, Slavery, Segregation, and Gentrification in Austin, which is the other show we have on right now, opened in February. But yes, this is years in the works. You don't just overnight bring to light something that has been hidden for 150 years.
And Rowena, if people want to come to the Neill-Cochran House Museum, you are located at
2310 San Gabriel Street. We have on-site parking, which is a luxury in West Campus.
Yes, it is.
And we are open. You may not look like it right now, but we're all wearing masks. You have to be in a mask on site. We're limiting entry to the museum in order to keep down the occupancy levels to make it as safe as possible for everyone to be here.
And are people able to see inside this building?
Definitely, yes.
Yes, did you hear that? You can come walk in here yourself too with your admission.
That's right.
Rowena, thank you so much. We'll be seeing you again soon, but thank you, Neill-Cochran House Museum. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thanks for coming out.